It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
So again, as I've said earlier, I think during the Trump years, one of the services I think Donald Trump did for the country is point out just how important other elected offices are, like the Attorney General position. I think they finally were coming around to it, which is why I'm so thrilled to see Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison sit down with us. For our folks listening on KTNF in Minneapolis, you've got to be thrilled to see Keith on the program. Hey, thanks for taking some time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's good to be here, man, and great catching up on things. And so, and thank you for having a great program. I believe that more communication is the key to getting us on a path of democracy, and I mean small d.
Absolutely. Now, the thing is, I said this about Trump. The one thing I got a lot of bad problems. The one good thing is I think what Republicans have done is made everyone more aware of how important other offices are. It's not just about president or senator. Sure. It's about all the way down the ticket.
You're right. Well, so one example, as I remember, is that me and attorneys general, Democratic attorneys general, including Josh Shapiro, had to come together to sue the Postal Service because in the last election, Trump's guy was trying to throttle and squeeze out the Postal Service because he wanted to stop voting by mail.
No joy.
And so we came together and were able to do that. That helped a lot of people see that, hey, AG is important. We also defended the Affordable Care Act for people who like having health care, and that's a good thing. And then just so many other things, including clean water, clean air. The AG job, I was in Congress for 12 years, left there because I thought that, we have, writing the laws is great. Enforcing the ones we have can be very important too.
And it depends on the mindset. Look, we talked to a guy who's running for prosecutor in Cleveland, and he said, look, I want to go after power.
Sure.
It's not about just hammering, using the power as a hammer to go after the desperate and the people who are struggling, but we want to go after the powerful. And this is part of what the Attorney General's office, I think, can be. Yep. In our state, Josh Shapiro did a great job, going after wage theft.
Yep.
You're doing the same thing now in Minnesota.
Same. Well, so here's the thing: when it comes to this issue of, say, crime, obviously, if one private citizen hurts another one, we are going to hold people accountable and get the truth out. But so often, crime is something that starts upstream. So take, for example, the crisis, and I believe it is a crisis, of the theft of Kia and Hyundai vehicles that do not have anti-theft equipment in them. That's a decision made in a corporate office that we're not going to put equipment in this car that 98% of all other cars have, because it's going to save us money, but the cost will be borne by society, where kids can look on YouTube or TikTok, figure out how to steal these cars, and now you have an epidemic of car theft all over the nation, complete with high-speed chases, deaths. Somebody said to me, why are you going after Kia and Hyundai? I said, well, wait a minute. You want me to arrest a 17-year-old joyrider? What about upstream? Same on the gun issue. We all know that people who shoot each other in our communities, you can't do that. You will be held accountable if you do. But what about the fact that we have, manufacturers and sellers, retailers, who are selling to gun traffickers and guns that ended up on the streets? But
Keith, it's not guns that kill people. It's not guns.
Yeah, you're right.
People kill people.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the gun helps.
Well, you know what? I tell you, that's like saying, you had dinner, but, you didn't use a blender and you didn't use a knife to chop the vegetables. It was all just, vegetables getting themselves in a pot and mixing themselves up together. It is the instrumentality that makes and accelerates the lethality. And that is beyond I don't even debate that with people because that's obvious. They want to get you into a distraction. But look, guns are critical to the level of insecurity we have in our communities. We do have to have common sense gun rules on people. Background checks. 90% of Americans believe it. Even gun owners think it's right. And I tell you something about these red flag laws. They save lives too.
Yeah.
And, having waiting periods makes a big difference. One of the leading causes of death by handgun is suicide. Now, suicide, as we know, is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Somebody going through despondency, if they got to wait 48 hours to get that gun, that might be the time they need to get the help that they need. And so normal gun rules make a lot of sense. Every other industrialized country has them, not us. But here's the key. Whenever there's a tragic mass shooting, people often are afraid and they go out and do what? Buy a gun.
More guns. Yeah? No.
And so for the gun manufacturer, great. The gun manufacturer says, oh, school shootings, arm the teachers. Guess what? That's another sale for them.
Yep.
It's not about the right to bear arms. It's the right to sell arms. That is what it's about. They are trafficking in death, murder, and mayhem, and they're wrong for doing it, and we're going to stop it.
So how do you hold them accountable?
We're suing companies right now. We're going to keep it up. They passed this law called PLACA, which is protecting the right to commercial sales of firearms. But PLACA doesn't protect them 100%. And so there's a lot of guns out there that are just, that are alleged to have defaults in their operation. Like the Sig Sauer P320 has been alleged to have fired all on its own, and gun owners are selling them. So this is in the holster going off. You mean we can't sue for a product defect? We should be able to, and people are. But then also there are negligent sales, negligent entrustment, nuisance actions that can happen with regard to people who sell guns improperly. There's a lot we can do, and we got to do it because we got to save people's lives.
No, ultimately this comes back down to to desperation and I want to live in a place where people are hopeful for the future.
Yes.
And aren't scared. Most of the people I know who have arsenals, they're afraid to walk around the corner.
It is a sign of fear. It's not a sign of manhood. And that's the other thing. A lot of these gun companies will have, take your man card back.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude.
I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland.
Sure.
I was the only white kid in an all-black neighborhood.
Right.
Never felt the need to have a gun.
Mm-mm.
Never. I now live in a very upper middle class, white rural area. I've got 3. And I say this all the time, and my black friends they laugh. White people scare me because there's this fear that we've got to arm up. And what the corporate controlled media has sold them is they've got to be afraid of XYZ. You name it. Today's outrage candy is what you need to be afraid of.
Yeah.
When the reality is what we need to be afraid of is we're being robbed blind by corporate America.
Yeah.
Mass consolidation is screwing us at every turn.
Market concentration, big deal.
Big freaking deal.
State AGs are working on that. I want to let you know.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about,
Sure.
because this is a huge issue to me. Wage theft, a huge issue to me.
Yeah.
All of the things around consumer protection,
Sure.
huge issues, because those affect working people's lives.
Well, I tell you, your state and mine have a lot in common in that we have strong dairy industries.
Right.
And being a small dairy producer is very, very difficult. People are getting pushed out. We've lost over 700 dairy farms in Minnesota in the last few years. And people are still, the number of cows milked is not really changing that much. What's changing is who owns them.
Yep.
They're going into fewer and fewer hands. And it's kind of hard. I mean, look, if you have a small dairy farm, you probably have a job outside of that farm because you can't make it on what they're paying you, even though,
I know lots of people who are in that situation.
Yeah, and so what if we had more? So the problem is, under Trump in particular, he had an ag secretary named Sonny Perdue who said, "Get big or get out." That's the opposite of what the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act require. Our antitrust laws don't say get big or get out. They say if you get big, we're going to chop you down.
And we need to be doing a lot more of that.
Right.
Especially when you're talking about tech.
Yeah.
As much information as they're collecting on
Sure.
us. And
My
with
goodness.
AI coming, I want people who are going to be attorneys generals. I want people in Congress
Sure.
who have the vision of what's coming and help protect from the dangers that are, and AI and robotics are coming.
Oh, they're coming and they're here. But see, here's the thing. Why are all these so-called capitalists against capitalism? I mean, they don't want free markets. It's the last thing. They want monopolistic control and oligopoly. So we've added more people to our antitrust team because we believe that having competitive markets lowers barriers to entry, allows people to get in them, lowers price, increases different sort of product, offerings. But when you concentrate and let the big just get bigger, they lock everybody out. They buy up innovation and never let it hit the market.
No.
These are the fights we got to have.
Yeah, your handler's giving me the eye. I got to let you go here. But last question here at Netroots. You've been here over a number of years.
I love
What do you
Netroots.
think? What do you think? What's going on here, and what do you hope comes out of this?
Well, I can't claim to be an expert, but what I will say is that this is a premier gathering of people who love small d democracy, believe that that liberty and justice for all. These people believe in liberty and justice for all. We believe that this country is greater when everybody gets to participate in it, and that is what this Netroots embodies for me. So I come because I get inspired by people like you, Mr. Rick Smith.
The hope is they come out of this and they go vote.
Go vote, go get involved, go run for office, go start a radio program, do something. Don't sit on your butt. Get moving and get active, because our democracy, I believe, is under threat.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I say this all the time. Joe Walsh and I are friends because we want to save democracy.
Yeah.
We don't agree on anything else.
But, that's enough.
That's enough. But, Keith, I appreciate you taking time for us. Hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
I'm your guy.
Thanks so much. Keith Ellison, Attorney General in Minnesota. Going to take a quick break. Right back here from Netroots Nation. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the auto factories of Michigan to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, President of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The old factory towns in America's heartland have been taking a beating. Thing is, though, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The new CHIPS bill that got passed will bring jobs back home and has already resulted in big announcements of major new factories opening. The American Recovery Package has allowed cities and counties to hire new police officers and firefighters and start rebuilding their communities again. We're finally turning things around after 40 years of screwing over working people. But will we keep moving in the right direction? That's our choice.
It doesn't matter what kind of weather. It doesn't matter what time of day or night. When Mother Nature's done her worst, the only thing that matters to us is keeping the lights on for you. The hardworking women and men of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, dedicated to keeping the power on in communities all across the country. Because when bad weather strikes, we know what matters most. IBEW, the power professionals.
So small world as we're here in Chicago covering Netroots Nation. As a kid growing up in Cleveland, it seems like we find each other. And no matter where I go, there's somebody go, yeah, I live in Cleveland, or I lived in Cleveland. It's one of those good, those solidarity, camaraderie little things. But I like my hometown to do a little bit better. And you may remember not too long ago, we talked about the wage theft ordinance that the city passed. Also, the county went and did. Well, now you need somebody who's going to enforce it. And that's why when I came across Matthew On, who is running for prosecutor in Cleveland, I said, you got to come on and talk to me about, hey, how are we going to enforce this wage theft thing and make workers' lives better? That's why I've asked Matthew to come sit down with us. Matthew is a law professor at Cleveland State University's Law School, also running for prosecutor. Matthew, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, first question I ask every candidate, what is it, why? Well, why are you going to do this to yourself? Sounds like you got a good gig, law professor, life's good. Why are you going to throw yourself in the middle of this mess?
Oh, I've loved teaching over the last few years. I really got motivated to run just looking at the kinds of outcomes we were getting in the prosecutor's office in Cuyahoga County. I'll just give you 2 quick statistics. Cuyahoga County tries nearly as many children as adults as the rest of Ohio combined, and has actually led the entire nation in new death sentences over the last 5 years.
Wow. And why is that?
Those are things that are completely within the control of the head of the office. So if the incumbent did not want those things to happen, they wouldn't happen. And if I become the head prosecutor, they would not happen.
So how would you deal with, I know some people are going to go, well, if you kill somebody, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. How do you deal with someone who's murdered someone? Do you pursue? I'm not a death penalty person, so because I know that it's unequally applied. As someone who grew up in a housing project in Cleveland, I know how bad the justice system can be to poor people, especially to minorities. But how would you handle that?
Well, the death penalty, as we know from research, that it is prone to error, prone to bias, doesn't actually work to reduce the murder rate, and is extremely expensive to implement because there are usually millions of dollars worth of court costs with the extra appeals and housing somebody on death row. And a lot of victims have actually said the process of those longer appeals is re-traumatizing to them. And so a sentence of, for example, life without parole rather than death actually provides more closure to a lot of folks.
Yeah, no, I've said from the beginning, I'm not a death penalty person. I don't believe in state-sponsored murder. I get vigilante justice on a certain level. You touch my kid, people react and get heated. I get that, but in the calm of a state trial, I don't know. Just because of the unequal treatment, that's where I'm uncomfortable with it, and I think we should do away with it. So outside of that, are there other things? I mean, I started this on the wage front.
Yes.
The wage theft front. And then we went really heavy. I thought we would get into the other stuff down the road. But for me, prosecutors, attorneys generals, these are people who are supposed to be helping working people.
Yes.
And wage theft is one of those issues that I think is extremely important, especially in Cleveland, because they've done some really good work around creating an environment to hold people accountable.
Absolutely. And I was part of the Guardians for Fair Work coalition that got wage theft ordinances passed in the city of Cleveland and in Cuyahoga County more broadly as well. And it is something that falls within the jurisdiction of the prosecutor's office, but a lot of prosecutors' offices don't treat it like that. In Ohio, wage theft it meets all of the elements of theft. And we should be treating it as such, given that I think it's about 75% of the sort of illegal transfers of wealth in this country are wage theft. It dwarfs all robbery, larceny, everything else.
All the stick-up stuff, all the stuff that we want maximum sentences for, gas station robberies, bank robberies, it dwarfs in comparison. But we never lock up the white criminals, the white collar. I meant to say white-collar criminals. That slipped. We know. Well, I mean, truth of the matter is the white-collar criminals are probably usually white, but I'm not going to go there either. But we don't usually go after them. Corporate criminals never seem to get the justice that I want them to get because, well, again, unequal system.
Absolutely. And so I like to think about crime in 2 buckets, or 2 ends of a spectrum, rather. Crimes of desperation and crimes of power. And we tend to over-enforce any kind of crime of desperation and under-enforce any kind of crime of power. And workplace crimes or corporate crimes generally fall on that crimes of power end of the spectrum. And the prosecutor's office has a lot of power. And if it's used to enforce against those crimes of power, we can create a more just, a more fair society for working folks and for everybody.
I got to tell you, I wish more people would explain that in those ways. Because that's really important for people to understand. There is desperation, and I've talked around this a lot. Look, the person who stole food because they got to feed their kids, I don't really have a problem with. The people who are robbing us blind because they want more, another yacht, a third, fourth house, or whatever, I have serious problems with, but we always focus on that person who we see. We always focus on that person who might be behind us using the EBT card or something like that. And we're never focused on the real abuses.
And I think there's all sorts of follow-on effects to that as well. Because we don't talk about things like wage theft and other kinds of corporate crime, we haven't even gotten to this question of sort of corporate profits driving inflation, right? This is a conversation that I think a lot of people are just starting to have.
Oh no,
but
day
like,
one.
I mean, and like not you specifically, but like a lot of folks who haven't put these pieces together yet, because we still haven't even talked about things like wage theft with a lot of folks who aren't as politically engaged as you or I. And I think there's all sorts of connections that we can make if we actually start to prosecute these kinds of crimes of power. Environmental dumping is another big one that, the vandalism statute in Ohio actually covers environmental dumping as a crime as well. That's another thing that, hurts working folks, right? Folks who live in the areas where the air and the water is being polluted.
Right.
These are the kinds of things that the prosecutors' offices can go after and historically have not.
And being a prosecutor of a major city like Cleveland, you could have some major power across the country. Because look, Cleveland, when I grew up in the 70s, was a major driver for the Clean Water and Clean Air Act.
Yes.
Again, I don't know how old you are, but when I was a kid, Lake Erie was dead. You didn't swim in Lake Erie. No. It was horrible. The only fish you saw were floating sideways with one eye looking up at the sky, because everything was because we had polluted it so bad. So talking about that as an environmental justice frame, but also just as good citizenry, good governance, I think is really important as well.
Absolutely. And this is sort of, all of these things are somewhat connected, right? These corporate crimes such as wage theft, environmental crimes, these are all things that affect the public and working folks. And there is, I think, a lack of enforcement just generally, not just with crimes of power, but anything that affects public integrity and society as a whole. And so this is, I think, a really important thing for prosecutors to look at, is how do we actually sort of enforce and promote the public integrity of the powerful folks, whether that is public servants or elected officials, whether that is corporations or corporate CEOs. These are the kinds of things that will actually lead to more just outcomes, better outcomes for working folks, and in the long term, less crime.
There you go. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Matthew On. His website, matthew-on.com. We'll get links on social media, how you can take a look at his website. Maybe donate. I would love to have prosecutors who think the way you do. We've been trained to believe that prosecutors are all about just, punitive stuff. We're going after the petty criminals, the people that we see, people who break windows or break into cars or whatever. And look, we need to enforce those, but there's a lot more that can and should be done to ensure that people are protected.
I think a lot of prosecutors see themselves as a hammer all the time. And it's important to be a hammer sometimes, but there are other tools in the toolbox.
Can you be a hammer?
Absolutely. Accountability is really important, but it can't be the only tool we use.
Because we're in Chicago, and look, Chicago's a lot like Cleveland. That's the reason I love Chicago so much. But we're told, the frame that I get everywhere I go in rural communities, they look at Chicago, it's burning. Everyone, there's crime everywhere. Everyone's walking out of stores. Nobody obeys the law, and it's because of people like you who say, well, we're not going to prosecute things. Is that where we're at? Do you buy that frame? Do you see that actually happening?
Not at all. And I live in Cleveland proper. I live very close to downtown Cleveland. And, I commute by bike. I don't even commute by car. I certainly have witnessed crime. And there is crime that's out there, obviously, right? It's not to say that there is no crime.
There always is going to be.
But, we have to make sure that we hold folks accountable, but also make sure that they don't come back into the system. And generally the way to do that is to think outside of just being a hammer, right? There is some perhaps debt to society that somebody can pay, but we don't want to saddle them with debt forever.
Right. No. Look, we need more people who think this way. And again, I hope folks will check out Matthew-on.com. We'll get links out on social media. Matthew, I appreciate you taking some time. I wish you the best. I want to see my hometown do really well and lead the nation on something positive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much
Appreciate
for
the
having
time. Thanks so much. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back here from Netroots Nation. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
I've been driving buses for 5 years, and my day-to-day routine is I wake up a little earlier than most people. I get on a bus, I go out, I pick up some students and make sure they get to school nice and safe. Here in Fairbanks, Alaska, that can be a challenge because of the winter weather and the icy roads. But I love the job. So the Teamsters are great. They provide us a lot of protections. They've always taken care of their people, made sure that our jobs were secure. We didn't have to worry about whether or not we'd have a job from day to day.
And that's amazing because before we'd be working 4, 6, 8 hours a day and only earning minimum wage was real difficult to make a living. Then the Teamsters pushed a law so we make something we can live off of and not have to have a second job. What absolutely gives me peace of mind. The union membership allows me to focus on this job without having to worry about whether or not my family is going to be taken care of. I'm Andrew Case, and I'm proud to be Teamsters Local 959.
Before we close the program, we want to take a moment to thank our viewers and to share a little bit about why we do what we do. At The Rick Smith Show, we believe that media today is almost entirely controlled by corporate greed. So we have now 24-hour news channels. But instead of 24 hours of news, what we get is 1 hour repeated 24 times, and with tons of commercials creating obscene amounts of profits. Information once presented as a public service has now become a private commodity. So when lies make money, lies are what we get. We get a corporate-controlled rage machine feeding us anger and hate, trying to convince us that our problems are right, left, or red, blue, when they are and always have been up, down, the wealthiest 1% versus the rest of us. Our goal is to be an alternative to that machine, not as a news show with a fancy journalist out front, but as a talk show run by a union truck driver and a team of working-class heroes just like you. Everything we do, both what we get right and what we get wrong, is dedicated to advancing the interests of America's working families. No corporate ad buys, no think tanks, no focus groups, no talking points. We are media by working people, for working people. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.